iTech Solutions CEO Brian Weiss joins to discuss a little bit of news and a story on shaping vendor roadmaps, plus an interview with Datto's Chief Information Security Officer Ryan Weeks on trends and best practices in SaaS security. It's a ChannelPro Weekly Special Edition, Seafood Conundrum. This episode is sponsored by Datto. As a leading global provider of security and cloud-based software solutions purpose-built for managed service providers, MSPs, Datto believes there is no limit to what small and medium businesses, SMBs, can achieve with the right technology. Datto's solutions help MSPs develop their client's security posture, solve critical technological problems, and reduce administrative burden. From proactive dynamic protection and detection to fast, flexible recovery from cyber events, Datto's solutions defend against emerging threats, as well as costly downtime and data loss in servers, virtual machines, cloud applications, or anywhere data resides. And they have a brand new offer for listeners of the ChannelPro Weekly podcast. MSPs can now trial Datto SaaS Protection completely free for 14 days. Datto SaaS Protection was designed exclusively for managed service providers to protect Microsoft 365 and Google Workspace applications. With 3x daily backups and flexible restore options, you can ensure your client's data is protected from permanent downtime and data loss. Jumpstart your SaaS protection today. Try free for 14 days at datto.com/channelpro. Again, datto.com/channelpro. Hello and welcome to this special edition of ChannelPro Weekly, sponsored by our fine friends at Datto. We thank them for sponsoring this bonus episode, and we're going to get to why it's a bonus episode here in just a second. But for those who are not familiar with the show, my name is Mo, Technology Editor, Online Director, and your host of ChannelPro Weekly. And joining me each and every week is the man of the hour, the guy who keeps the trains and planes and other public transportation methods that we have at ChannelPro, because I guess we do everything here as well. He keeps all of those running on time. Executive Editor Rich Freeman.
And I'm going to be branching out into those rent-a-scooters that you can get in downtowns now. I'm working on that.
Yeah. And are we also getting into like ride sharing and boating? Do we have public boating transportation? Ferrying, maybe?
Ferrying, yeah, ferrying would be good. Although I really think our boss Michael Siggins would like the ride sharing. Just set up a platform that could be a real cash cow for ChannelPro.
Absolutely could be. So keep an eye out for that, folks. Now, Rich, why is this a special edition episode?
Well, because as much as it looks and sounds as if we are right there with you folks, we're actually, through a feat of magic, we're in Chicago, Illinois right now, hosting an event, a ChannelPro event. So we have created the illusion of being present this week while we're in Chicago doing an SMB forum event. Yeah,
and that's what we're doing, and I bet it's awesome, and I hope everybody's there, but I hope everybody tunes in for this special edition episode sponsored by our friends at Datto. We do have a guest host for this special edition. Very excited to have him back. I've even got a little introduction for him, believe it or not, but I got to find it because I got a million windows up on my screen, Rich, and it disappeared. There we go. Our guest started his career in computers in a small shop while attending college. In 2005, he started iTech Solutions, which has grown into a security-first MSP managing well over 2,000 devices across many more clients. He's also actively looking for ways to give back to the community, notable by his involvement in several nonprofits. Please welcome the CEO of iTech Solutions, Brian Weiss. Welcome, Brian.
Thank you for having me.
I bet those numbers are even a little bit bigger than since the last time we last spoke with you and last had you on the show.
They are. And, you know, I've actually starting to split them into fully managed, co-managed, and VAM, value-added MSP clients, because it is kind of a different service offering we're giving them. So like my device count for VAM is probably 3,000, 4,000 just on its own. Co-managed, I've got, probably another 1,200 on top of the 2,000. So
now, have you had any luck getting the whole value added MSP acronym off the ground? Because I know that was a big push the last time we were on.
I'm asking people to come up with a better term, and if we can't, it's going to stick.
I like VAM. It's got a good ring to it.
Yeah, and it's much better than VAR. I do not want to be called a VAR, please.
Absolutely. So Brian, for those who maybe not have caught that particular episode you were last on, tell us a little bit more about you and what you do at iTech.
Yeah, so I'm trying to be the CEO, right? We're a 12-person company, but you tend to have to share hats, and especially more recently, unfortunately, we had a decent amount of staff turnover due to the Great Resignation, right? And everyone's dealing with that. So we finally just rehired up, and we're excited. We got a third of our team's brand new. We're really just ramping up, trying to help out internal IT departments of any company size. Like that's what we're trying to go after, because just like MSPs have been kind of drowning in this move to the cloud, keeping up with security, I almost have come to find that IT departments have been even more siloed, even more on an island than MSPs have, right? We've at least had all these years to be ready for something like COVID, whereas internal IT departments, unless it was part of their plan to move to the cloud already, they kind of, got hit with something they weren't prepared for. So, it's like I go to an internal IT department, they see Datto RMM, and it's like the coolest thing they've ever seen. And this is something I found 6 years ago. So 6 years ago for me, it was the coolest thing. Now I'm kind of like, hey, this is my day to day. So you see things like that and you realize they need a lot of help. And then I asked myself, what can I do with my knowledge? I want to make the largest impact. It's going to be helping these larger companies. So that's really where we're going. I'm trying to engage with vendors to help make that happen.
It's interesting, Brian, because I had barely heard of co-managed IT before a panel discussion at an event I attended that you were part of. You were on stage, part of this panel discussion about co-managed IT, and that's like January 2020. And at that point, it's this kind of emerging trend. There are people on the leading edge who are talking about it. And just as COVID sort of accelerated so many other things in IT, including the move into the cloud, it really did kind of supercharge co-managed IT and the maybe the larger trend of corporate IT departments partnering with MSPs for exactly the kind of reasons that you're talking about there.
I think what we're going to do is, Rich, we got a lot on the show that we want to get to, and we got a really great interview coming up with Ryan Weeks. He's the Chief Information Security Officer at Datto, and we're going to have a big conversation about trends and prices in SaaS security specifically. But before we get to that, I think we want to cover a couple news stories, and we've got another story that we're going to talk about that kind of will lead into that interview, because I think it's going to be a very important point to kind of illustrate some of the things that we're talking about when we talk about SaaS security. So why don't we go ahead and strap on in and see what we got in store for you. So Rich, our first story is about PAX 8. They are going to be offering solutions from who?
They are going to be offering solutions from Amazon Web Services. And this is an interesting kind of sign of the times story from my perspective. And I say it future tense. They announced, by the time you're listening to this podcast, folks, it's been about 2 weeks since PAX 8 announced this. This officially goes into effect on May 18th. But you will be able to order over 250 AWS services via PAX 8. And it is a sign of the time story from my perspective, because PAX 8, which has become a very big name in cloud distribution, they've become a huge reseller or distributor rather of Microsoft cloud services. They've really never done anything with AWS before, in large part because they focused so much on the managed services community and MSPs who are serving SMBs. And even though AWS is the number one public cloud platform in the world by a pretty wide margin, the last time I looked, I think 35 or roughly a third of the public cloud market owned by AWS. Azure is number 2 at 21%. Despite that fact, AWS doesn't have nearly the same footprint in the SMB world that Azure does, and that has been reflected in the offerings that you get from PAX 8. And so it is an indicator that this is beginning to change, and the PAX 8 folks confirmed they're seeing more and more interest in AWS among their partners, particularly their bigger and more successful partners. And then the other thing that this kind of reflects and feeds into is this whole trend towards multi-cloud. Nearly 2/3 of businesses will have a multi-cloud environment by 2025, according to some recent research from Nutanix. So for a company like Pax8, if you want to be, remain relevant and be a player in the world of multi-cloud, well, obviously that means you got to be on AWS too. So, we'll see how big a part of their business this becomes in the short term. I think in the longer term, this is another indicator that even in the SMB market, you're seeing MSPs and their customers branch out a little bit beyond the Microsoft cloud that people are so familiar with.
So, Brian, I'll turn it over to you. Are you looking to get more Amazon Web Services, and or are you still kind of more firmly in the Azure camp?
So we're definitely firmly in the Azure camp. Where I see AWS coming in is really with the larger clients we're working with. Maybe they've already got workflows set up where they're using AWS resources, or you mentioned even just for redundancy, right? You don't want to have all your eggs in one basket. So we know we have this important data in this cloud. We want to replicate it somewhere. Where do we replicate it, right? Let's replicate it to another cloud. What are the choices, Google or Amazon, right? I will say that if I had an easy way to sell Amazon, that would be I'd be more reluctant to want to do it. We completely avoid Adobe right now because we can't really resell it, right? So I'm hoping to see Adobe show up on Pax8's line card one day. So with the type of clients I'm getting into, there's kind of two parts to it. It's where do they buy their licensing from? And do they want to consolidate that under one vendor so they don't have all these different vendors? And there's who's providing the support behind the product, right? Or the consulting if they don't need support. Maybe they just need best practice consulting. And so I could see AWS showing up on our line card down the road, at the very least for licensing, right? I've sold an enterprise client, Datto RMM, and they brought up to me, hey, we're buying our Microsoft licensing from this other company. We'd rather just buy it from you. Can we buy it from you instead? And we're like, oh yeah, no problem. We'll transfer that over, right? So it's just kind of that idea. I think that's really what Pax8's helping enable MSPs for the most, is just, hey, let's start getting some of that licensing revenue and then start looking for other ways to make revenue off of AWS. But for the SMB market, I don't know that AWS is used too much. You mentioned that earlier, right? So then the next question is Amazon hoping that maybe this is a driver to get into the SMB space a little bit more, right?
It does seem like an odd distinction. Is there a reason, Brian, that you can think of that why SMB focused MSPs tend to lean more towards Azure versus Amazon, or is it just because it's easy to do because they're probably already a Microsoft partner and it's a couple of clicks to get into the Azure cloud?
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about companies that aren't startups, right? Brand new. So they originally came from Microsoft, right? So, and then I think the other aspect too is like Microsoft and Google, they have kind of directory management. They've got user and device management capabilities, right? Also baked in. And so when you look at that and then try to look at AWS's cloud, you're really it's more for cloud workflows, in my opinion. So until they come out with a directory service too, I mean, I guess you could use Okta maybe with AWS and call it a day, right? Although not, Okta wasn't too great in the news lately, but it happens, Yeah,
they all get a negative news story every now and then. Rich, anything else to add about Pax8?
Just quickly that Pax8 is surrounding, so I mentioned they're going to be over 250 AWS services through Pax8. They are going to be surrounding some of those services with, some of the things Pax8 partners are familiar with in terms of sales and technical training and collateral and outsourced professional services and so on. They're starting in the obvious place or places, which is EC2 and S3, the two most widely used, best known AWS components, and they'll kind of build from there. So you can get a lot of different services from Pax8, but you'll get the complete sort of Pax8 experience initially on S3 and EC2.
Very cool.
And I will jump in. I have heard MSPs using AWS. Where I hear it used the most is storage for backup. That's where they're sending their backups to the cloud, right? Is typically what I hear about it the most right now.
Well, and that's according to the article here. There's a $50.5 billion global market for cloud infrastructure services, and they have a lot of it. So it might be revenue you're leaving on the table. So you might want to check it out. Next story, Rich, is and folks, there's also a lot more information about these different stories that we're going to talk about. Go to the show sheet for ChannelPro Network at channelpronetwork.com for the special edition episode sponsored by Datto. Or if you're on YouTube watching, you can open up the description area. If you're on your phone, a lot of times you can open up the description area there. We put links to all these articles so you can get all of the extra details and information. So make sure you don't shortchange yourself and get all the detail. So, Rich, the next story is always a good story to hear. I always like seeing titles that say like commercial PCs aren't dying, right? We always hear like the death of the computer, but according to Dell, it's going well still. What's this about?
You know, this is really interesting to me. So I get an opportunity to meet with an executive in the partner organization at Dell 4 times a year. They kind of give me this quarterly update on how the business is doing. And the piece of that latest conversation that kind of jumped out at me was the emphasis that they placed on how well their commercial client business in particular is doing right now. Client solution orders through the channel in the fourth quarter of Dell's fiscal year were up 20% year over year. And the client revenue more broadly, so, you know, the sales outside the channel as well as within the channel, was up 26% year over year in that quarter to a record-setting $17.3 billion. And to understand why this, maybe this jumps out at everybody. I mean, here we are more than 2 years into the pandemic. We all remember the race to get laptops and notebooks out to people when work from home went into effect. I saw some data from an analyst company called Canalys recently. They said that since the start of the pandemic, the world's installed base of PCs has grown by 150 million devices. So, I mean, there has been enormous sales momentum around PCs for 2 years, and you would think at some point in time that might start slowing down. And it hasn't slowed down for Dell. They are not alone in this regard. I asked them, you know, because they were talking to me about their fourth quarter. We're well into their first quarter of the new fiscal year now. And I asked them, well, how's it going? Is it starting to slow down? And not really, is what they're seeing so far. We'll know a little bit later when they report their latest quarterly numbers. So, you know, they don't even really know why that is. I got, you know, 3 theories about what might be responsible for that. That there is the continued shift to work from anywhere as opposed to work from home, and the idea that people who are maybe not equipped for that flexibility and mobility still need to be equipped. Windows 11, not exactly new to the market, but it is driving some refreshes and upgrades. And then a trend that we have actually talked about before, you know, as early as last year, was just offices reopening, people being reunited with a desktop PC that's, you know, at this point, whatever, 3-5 years old, and there's some refresh going on around that. And then there was also, and this was a little bit different and interesting to me, is they also sort of said that they're seeing this kind of movement where businesses are really kind of getting focused about matching the right form factor to the right employee and their function. And I think, you know, we're all familiar with the idea that, okay, a salesperson, you know, they're mostly kind of working with the CRM app and email. They don't need a lot of horsepower, but they want something light with good, you know, so that there might be a particular form factor that's a good fit for a salesperson. According to Dell, they're seeing more roles like that get slotted into a particular kind of form factor, and that, you know, as companies realize that can make their employees more productive and efficient, they're doing some replacement around that. But the big story here that I just thought was interesting is there is no end in sight to the commercial PC buying boom.
Now, Rich, do you have any insight or comments from other PC manufacturers like Lenovo or HP? Are they seeing this same level of refresh in sales?
Yeah, you know, I mean, Dell was quick to talk in their the quarterly press release when these Q4 numbers came out about, you know, setting records. And I can't tell you off the top of my head whether or not HP and Lenovo in particular have been setting records, but they have been doing very well. They continue to do very well in the PC space.
Interesting. Brian, are you seeing this as well with your clients? Are you just doing a lot of hardware refresh? Are they getting lots of new stuff?
Yeah, I mean, we're having to stock equipment just to keep up with it because we can't get it quick enough, right? I'd say, the things that stick out from my kind of experience over the past couple of years is definitely a huge movement from desktop to laptop. So clients replacing desktops that don't even need to be replaced just to get the user on a laptop, right? So it'd be interesting to see what their difference is between laptop and desktops, because we order a lot less desktops than we used to now. The form factor thing, I think you hit on the nail too, the head on the nail, because we were initially, you kind of do this, oh, we got these extra laptops, hand them around. Oh, this one's too big and clunky. This screen's too big. This screen's too small, right? And so you almost have to get into a situation where you predetermine, hey, for this role, they get this equipment, and that's just the way it is. But we know they're not going to complain about it, hopefully, because it's meeting their needs, their specific needs for that role, right? So I think when you get into laptops, it's less, desktop can work, for the average person, whereas a laptop, it gets a little more personal, right? In what you work with. The other thing I wonder about too is tech debt, right? And the fact that, like, the federal government funded a lot of these companies, right, during COVID. And it's like, hey, we're going to give you a ton of money, right? I mean, we got a PPP loan. We use that money to do a hardware refresh ourselves, so, there might be some tech debt that was getting caught up with due to some funding, maybe from COVID. But all in all, I would say, the work from home push is the biggest driver, right? It's the fact that, hey, we need people to work from anywhere. And we don't want them complaining about their device.
Well, just remember though, it doesn't matter what device you give Tim, he's going to complain regardless, right?
There are those, yes.
So Rich brought up an interesting point about Windows 11, which I don't really see as a driver of a lot of change, but I could be wrong on that. At least not right now. I know that they're because you can't upgrade certain computers that don't meet certain requirements, particularly I think it's an 8th gen.
I would agree with that, but take it back to the 7 to 10, because believe it or not, I'm sure there was still a lot of people running 7 out there when this hit, right? And so I don't know that 11 is at the point now where it's driving people to want to upgrade just because 11's out. I would say it's more like, hey, we still have all these Windows 7 computers. What do we can't upgrade them. We're not going to upgrade the OS. They're too old, right? I would probably point to that maybe more.
Interesting. Yeah, I bet.
In SMB anyway, right? The SMB market, yeah.
Right, which hardware tends to have are you seeing that? So that leads me to an interesting question. Historically, SMB tend to run hardware for much longer cycles. It wouldn't be uncommon to see a 7-year-old desktop or a 7-year-old laptop still in circulation. With SMB working more closely with technology providers like you, are we seeing that recycle time shortened? Is hardware deployed for less lengthy periods of time now?
For us, yes, definitely. A part of that is the cost has come down over time, not for video cards, unfortunately, but in general, right? So you start asking yourself, like, do I spend another $1,500 on a system, or do I try to use this one for another 1 to 2 years and lose 4 times that in inefficiency with my employee complaining? We also started kind of putting our foot down where if something's end of life and we get too many tickets on it, we have a right to start charging for the labor on that, right? So then if they start seeing labor bills with this old computer, then it's the used car syndrome, right? You're putting more money into it than it's even worth, which is an even easier conversation to have. So I think it ultimately comes down to the MSP and their driving force. If there's an MSP that's allowing clients to use 10-year-old computers, then they're going to do it.
Good. It's a good idea to try to help MSPs not keep old hardware out there, but by adding a little extra fees to the end of life stuff. That's a pretty good idea. Any other cool little tricks that you do like that to keep the deployed fleet fresh?
There's been some cases where we've just replaced the computer for the client, like literally. we had a used computer and we're like, you know what, you're not going to replace this. This one is going to do better. It didn't cost us anything. We're putting it in instead. Right. Sometimes because it's saving us time down the road and headache, and we weren't ready to part ways with the client. I mean, nowadays, if we run into that type of headbutting with a client, typically we're looking to part ways with them. And I think that's really part of the struggle in the MSP channel is we want to grow our business. So we're taking on clients that maybe aren't the best client to be taking on, and it's costing us extra money. We're losing money with that client, but we're afraid to get rid of them because we're trying to grow our business. But when you get to a maturity level where you can gather the business intelligence and be able to see that, I mean, you could do it even at a smaller level. You just got to find the time to do it. And you can actually see your profitability for each client, right? You quickly identify which clients you either need to start charging more money for if you're going to continue that level of support, or talk to them about why it's taking so much time and address those issues. Is it an expectation thing with the client? Is it old tech that needs to be replaced, right? If those things don't change, then your cost is going to have to go up, or we're going to have to part ways, right? Because it's a business. You can't be doing work for someone where you're losing money on it. Even your clients wouldn't want to do that. So if they understand that's happening with their account, 9 times out of 10, maybe even more than that, when I've brought that up, it's a very understanding conversation to the point like, oh, wow, you're losing money on our account. That sucks. Like, they don't want that to happen, So,
right. Well, they don't want to be a charity either. Right. So they don't want you to be a charity. That makes sense.
Yeah.
So very cool. Well, good advice. Good stuff. Nice to see that the PC market is still robust and that everyone is doing well there. So, Rich, that's it for the news, but I want to go to a story that I think is going to tie in really well to some of the stuff that we're going to talk about when we talk about SaaS security with Ryan Weeks from Datto here in a little bit. And that is a story called Shaping Vendor Roadmaps. Tell us about this.
So this is a story that ran in the April issue of ChannelPro. We didn't get a chance to talk about it on earlier episodes of the podcast, and so I wanted to work it into the agenda for this conversation in part because our guest host is somebody who has an outsized influence, let's say, on a major vendor's roadmap. Brian is on the partner advisory council at Datto, and he has relationships there and has the ear of executives there in a way that the average Datto partner doesn't. And I think the average ChannelPro in our audience would very much like to be able to shape the roadmap, influence the roadmap of the products that they use, to a greater degree than they can. And then the question becomes, well, how do I get myself heard? What are the techniques that will enable me to have some more influence with strategic vendors? We talk about that in the article, but I really kind of wanted to just bring that topic up by referencing this article and just see, Brian, maybe tell folks a little bit about the journey that, now you're on the partner advisory council. They're asking you to influence their roadmap. But I mean, what techniques did you use to kind of get to that point in terms of having some more influence with, a key company in your world?
So it really stems from wanting to make the time. I would say that before I started on this journey, it always felt overwhelming to have to spend that much time with a vendor when I'm also running a business. And so I don't know that I could have done what I'm doing right now at the level I'm doing it back when I was smaller, right? Because I was too involved with the day-to-day of my business. It would have been too detrimental. It still is detrimental to the growth of my business. Technically, I probably spend at least 6, maybe sometimes 8 hours a week just interfacing with vendors on meetings. I'm on other partner advisory councils too with other vendors. But what happened was I started out doing it a little bit, and then more and more and more, and pretty soon I got addicted to it, because what I realized is it helps me stay in the know of what the future of our vendors look like, which is really what I need to understand for what the future of my company looks like too. And going through the security event we went through, it wasn't me wanting to initially like get involved to say, hey, I need you to make your product more convenient for me. It's like, I need to understand what security gaps your product might have, right? I went through a huge event myself with a ransomware attack. So, and it was a supply chain event. So naturally, I'm immediately investigating all my vendors, right? And trying to get to know them better. And with that comes being part of the roadmap, right? And helping design features, additions, things to make our lives easier. The thing that's different about our channel is that we've developed this fixed support model, right? And so a lot of things get overlooked, like the total cost of ownership of a tool that we might implement. And are we reselling that and marketing it up enough? Or are we ultimately losing money with that tool because of all the time it takes to maintain and manage? So I feel like the big driver for a lot of MSPs to want to give feedback to channel vendors is, you're making my job harder than it is, right? Here's how you can make it easier. Here's how you can save me time, right? Which I think is amazing. That's the convenience side, right? But there's also the security side, and they got to be balanced. You can't have too much convenience. You got to give up security. Too much security, you're giving up too much convenience, right? And so that's really where I get to kind of go into these vendors and say, hey, you sell to an MSP. You don't really know what my end clients are like. Let me help you understand what my end clients are like. Because yeah, there's a lot of tools you sell that maybe we only use, but there's a fair amount that our end users use, or the security from your tools affect the end users. And so how can we make this a better experience all the way down, right? From vendor to MSP down to end client. And I think that's really where the value comes into play. And the hard part is you have to build the use case. You have to get buy-in on it, right? And if you're not on a partner advisory council, your voice can seem kind of small, and you can kind of feel like, hey, maybe I'm not being heard. At that point, you really got to get the community to back you, right? You got to get other MSPs to vote up to say, yes, I need the same thing, right? But ultimately, what's going to drive their decisions is going to be the executive team, right? The partner advisory board doesn't really determine what's done or what's not done. We're just an advisory board. And they're ultimately going to look at multiple factors, right? Votes, impact, obviously tech debt. Does this feature also help get rid of some tech debt that we have, right? And then they kind of weigh it from there and put the roadmap out. What I've been working with Datto on to help with is in their feature request, like their ideas portal, right? Helping MSPs identify better the status of things. Because sometimes you go in there, you put a feature request, you're like, what does this mean? It says pending. Like, what does that mean? And like, give us more guidance on how we can give you better feature requests so that they're understood better. If we don't build out the proper use case, it might get overlooked. Another MSP might have that need, but if you didn't spell it out properly, they may not understand what problem you're trying to solve. So I think, I look at Microsoft. I don't feel involved in their roadmap at all, although I can go on the site and vote for things, right? But so that's a big difference I see. Microsoft enterprise level vendors, maybe you don't have to worry as much about security. Maybe they're taking care of their tech debt a little bit better. Whereas in the channel, it's all about convenience and efficiency first, is what I've found with most MSP products. And then unless it's a leading security product, right? Unless it's like, hey, we are an antivirus, the security kind of comes second. And you got to question how much development is put into that, right? If you've got a brand new to the market MSP product, they've got to gain market share. Unless they have a bunch of investors behind them, where do they really have the money to invest to make sure the product they developed is secure and meets the standards that should be? IWASP, I believe, is one of the standards that's used out there today as far as how to code in a secure manner, right? And so those are the things I want to start seeing from vendors, is more transparency about why I shouldn't be awake at night thinking about their product being a potential supply chain attack.
For sure, it's got to be difficult from the vendor perspective to solicit and act on so much feedback, because I'm sure yes. you would understand that, like, you want this particular feature and you want it to work this way, but somebody else wants a completely opposite feature to work a completely different way that contradicts what you want. So that's got to be a difficult thing for them to balance. How you said you spend about 6 to 8 hours a week interfacing with vendors. How much of that is putting in feature requests, voting? What kind of feedback methods do you prefer, or do you recommend people use to get started?
So I think it starts with your team more than anything. Because if you're going to take time away from your business to spend time working with vendors to improve their products, make sure it's something your team wants, right? So anytime I'm spending time with a vendor working on whatever objective it may be, it's something that my team's already kind of signed off on. It's like, hey, I'm going to talk to Datto about this. What do you guys think? Do you like this idea? Do you want to see this change? And then what's nice about that is then when the change happens and I bring it back to the team, now they're kind of encouraging me to work with vendors more. Right. Otherwise, if I'm spending all that time with vendors and getting nothing done, I'm frustrating myself and my team without any results. And then my team's questioning, like, is Brian really doing what's best for this company? Like, what's the value we're getting out of all of this? Right. So I think really what it comes down to is first meet with your team and figure out where the wants and needs are. And I've found that most of our wants and needs have been solved just by reestablishing new processes on how we handle things, right? It's like half the time it isn't the tool. It's, hey, we're just using the tool wrong. Let's use it better, right? And it doesn't even need a feature request. And I've been the embarrassed one who's put in a feature request and then been told, oh, it already supports that, right? But I don't know if that was really the best answer there, but the ideas portal is the source of truth. That's where they look at all these, right? You get it in there. Otherwise it doesn't exist. It's just like our company. If it's not in a ticket, it doesn't exist. That's what we tell our clients, right? So that's step one. Step two is you got to market it. I mean, you basically got to go out and market it to MSPs now and say, hey, go vote for my idea, right? Go vote and comment on it and try to get it up the chain. Short of that, you're reaching out to people on the product development team and trying to establish relationships with them and maybe being part of a beta, right? That comes up. They allow partners to be part of betas that aren't on the partner advisory council. If it's a feature that you happen to be interested in or something, typically you can get early access to it because they want your feedback on it. And I just realized that's the why I spend so much time on the partner advisory council, is because I want to be part of a lot of those betas before it goes to final development. I've had too many feature requests go in and me think that they know what needs to be done and then have it be fully developed and then just be so far from hitting the target that it doesn't even get adopted, literally, and it's, if they would have just had me part of the beta kind of rollout before they released it, there could have been just some tweaks or something we could have done to it. So I think that's really my driving factors. I spend all the time up front. I want to be part of that right at the end before it releases, just to make sure all that work I put in was worth it. In vendor relationships, I get referrals from. I mean, you start developing this network of people that even other MSPs, where sometimes there's work outside of our wheelhouse that we could do, but I don't really want to do it, so I send it to another MSP. The networking aspect of working with vendors and kind of, I've found other MSPs that have the same thinking as we do and are on the same path through vendors where I would have not normally found them.
It sounds like there's a lot of benefit for doing this if you can find the time to do it. You'll get more out of it than what you might expect, other than just a feature request.
Yeah, and I'm even though I don't use any of Kaseya's products and I have a bad history with them, I'm literally going to engage and get to know people on their team. I want to know what's going on with their company because they're part of my future now, right? So,
very interesting. Rich, anything else to add here?
No, I think that's great sort of voice of experience advice there, and we'll obviously link to the story from the magazine in the show notes.
Absolutely, and I think this is a good opportunity now to kind of transition over into our interview. So we're gonna take a break. When we come back, we're going to be talking with Ryan Weeks. He's the Chief Information Security Officer at Datto, And we're going to be talking about SaaS security and that story of vendor roadmaps and working with vendors and getting that communication going with the vendor is actually very critical when it comes to working together towards security in cloud applications. So we're going to be talking about that in a little bit. We'll be right back. Don't go anywhere. We will be back in a moment. And welcome back to part 2 of this special edition of ChannelPro Weekly, sponsored by Datto. We got a lot of things here to discuss in this interview segment, because as businesses continue their march to the cloud and SaaS applications, the more we have to think about keeping that data safe. Now, here to do a deep dive on trends and best practices in SaaS security is someone from Datto. Please welcome Ryan Weeks, the Chief Information Security Officer at Datto. Welcome, Ryan.
Hey, thanks.
It's great to have you on with us and great for you to be here. We've got a lot to talk about, but first I'd love it if you could tell us a little bit more about you and a little bit more about your role at Datto.
Yeah, sure. So I joined Datto a little over 5 years ago, charge of everything information security at Datto, both our internal information security as well as our products. If it looks, smells, or tastes like security, it's my responsibility. So before that, I came from financial services, fintech company. Really love the MSP space and feel really privileged to be able to bring the skills that I've learned from financial services over to help protect MSPs and SMBs. And so looking forward to our conversation today.
Yeah, it's great to have you here. So besides doing things important over there at Datto, whereabouts in the country are you from, and what kind of things do you like to do outside of being a Chief Security Information Officer?
Well, it doesn't leave much time for doing things outside of work, but I live in coastal New England, and so definitely enjoy. Actually, running to and back from the beach is probably my favorite thing to do outside of work. Something really relaxing about it. So yeah.
So a lot of good clam chowder up in your neck of the woods. Are you a big clam chowder fan?
I am not, but yes, there is a lot of good seafood up here.
Fantastic. Well, it's great. Hopefully we get to learn a little bit more about you as we move along in the interview. But Rich, why don't I send it over to you to kind of frame out what we're going to talk about here in this deep dive in SaaS security, maybe starting with what is SaaS security?
No, I think that's a great idea, because you're right. We said, hey, let's talk about SaaS security. But what exactly is SaaS security? Everyone who's in our audience right now understands what security is about. What specifically is different about security in a software as a service kind of environment? Ryan, what is SaaS security?
Yeah, it's a broad topic. I think, at the highest level, it is this set of activities that you undertake in order to secure the solutions that you use that are running outside of your ecosystem, which is what we largely define as SaaS, software as a service, software in someone else's cloud. And so, there's a lot of things that you would do to secure applications that would be deployed within your environment. Many of those things apply to SaaS, and there might even be more things that apply to SaaS. And so SaaS security, again, is the culmination of all the things that you need to do to secure your SaaS footprint. And it's fun because different SaaS applications have different implications. And so you might be doing different things to secure one SaaS application than you would for another. And so you really need to apply a risk-based approach to securing those assets. And I look forward to getting into this conversation a little bit more deeply.
Yeah, I mean, as further background, though, I can't help but wonder, I mean, as more and more workloads move into the cloud, as they have at an accelerated rate in the last 2 years, I mean, to what extent is SaaS security becoming synonymous with security at this point?
Yeah, I mean, you can't ignore it. I mean, any company now has SaaS. And so it is, and it's increasingly becoming part of your supply chain. And supply chain security has been a huge, huge topic over the past year. Whether it be named vulnerabilities and common software dependencies that wind up being used by software both on-prem and in the cloud, or whether it become compromises of SaaS vendors. We just lived through the Okta SaaS breach. And so there's a whole set of circumstances that have to do with that. But yeah, you can't escape it. It's here. It is part of your normal, and you have to be thinking about how to secure it.
I mean, I would go as far as even to say that if you had a company that wasn't using any SaaS products, everything was in-house, they still have employees that have a digital life that's out there on the web, Facebook, who knows, whatever SaaS applications they may be using personally, right?
Yeah.
And that's a concern as well. We're actually getting to the point where we're realizing it's easier for us to train end users on how to secure their personal life than it is their business. Because if you get them doing it personally, they naturally want to do it at the business so they don't fight it, right? Yeah. So we're trying to take that tactic now where it's like, hey, we're not telling you to do this just because you work for this company. We're telling you to do this because you need to do this for your personal life. Your close family and friends, you should be sharing this information. You should all be doing this. And then when it becomes a normal part of their day-to-day behavior in their personal life, they almost expect it when they get to work. Like, hey, why aren't we doing MFA on this account, right? I do that at home on my personal accounts. So I think that's the aspect too, is there is this digital life now that businesses are almost being looked at, being responsible for. There's one quick thing I'll mention. Someone signed up for a personal service using a company email account. And they thought, oh, well, because I used my company email account, I figure you guys would keep it secure for me, right? And it had nothing to do with the business they work for. So it's just kind of that thinking, kind of all the way down to the end user, even we have to help with.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of gets into shadow IT, right? And SaaS security now includes shadow IT. Used to be the installation of software on an asset or a device which hadn't been pre-authorized by your IT or security teams. Now shadow IT is like you could pay $1 a month and go sign up for some subscription to make your day job easier. And that SaaS footprint is now part of the company's overall security posture. And it's become incredibly easy for employees to facilitate shadow IT and affect the company's security posture. And so that's part of SaaS security too, is how are you managing the sprawl of SaaS, not just approved SaaS, but the SaaS that your end customers and end employees are bringing into your business as well.
Yeah, and that's maybe a good transition to something else that I want to talk about, which is everybody watching or listening right now is familiar with security. They have security skills. They're securing endpoints, let's say, for their customers. What are the different challenges surrounding SaaS security that maybe require different techniques and pose a different order of difficulty for a ChannelPro?
Yeah, I think for me, there's probably two really, really big things when it comes to SaaS security. One, identity and access management. How do you authenticate and provide access to and approve people for use in those applications? Used to be when you installed software, you would control who would be allowed to install certain sets of software using an Active Directory infrastructure, and that would be limited. And also the exposure of that software would be limited because a lot of times those assets aren't sitting on the internet. SaaS services are now internet-based services that you're consuming, and the operating system is not providing the identity assertion to that SaaS application. That's a second level of authentication the user has to do because they log into their machine and now they have to log into the SaaS application. And so where we see a lot of security issues with SaaS applications is actually in improper securing of credentials or authentication mechanisms relating to those SaaS applications. And then those credentials obviously getting stolen, reused, abused, by initial access brokers or whatever. Those can actually facilitate, larger scale breaches. And so identity and access management, everything that surrounds that, Brian brought up MFA, like that's absolutely critical to have an understanding of how you're protecting those services. And then the software security side of it, given these services are inherently internet facing, the need to understand the security footprint of them, how those applications are built securely and their security is maintained, becomes really, really important to the security of your business. And so I think for me, those are kind of two of the larger differentiations with SaaS security. Brian, interested to see what your thoughts are there.
Well, I would go as far as concerns around technical debt and supply chain vulnerabilities as well, right? Things that aren't even in your control as an MSP. I'm speaking from an MSP, right? So when I'm using a SaaS service, how long ago was it built, right? What type of enterprise security features does it have, or is it lacking? And are those going to get added? Because to me, that's a big issue where you've got, you wouldn't be able to do it overnight, but if you developed, say, a PSA from the ground up with a brand new platform, you'd have a lot less tech debt coming out of the gate, right? I mean, there'd be an initial investment, but you don't have all these old lines of code that you wish weren't even there anymore, right? And you don't need to maintain this institutional knowledge or this set of engineers that have this institutional knowledge of your product, where if there's too much turnover on your engineer team, now you've got an issue with even supporting and maintaining the product further. So my big issue right now that I have is I'm looking at all the vendors I use. I'm looking long-term that eventually even the SMB is going to be concerned about enterprise security. And I'm trying to figure out what does that look from a long-term point of view. And if I can minimize the amount of vendors I'm using, that's basically, the other thing is your surface attack space, right? So like right now, I did this count the other day. I have 9 agents on a given device with one of my clients, right? That's a huge surface attack. How do I get less agents? Why do I need that many agents? Why am I using so many products? So I think it's so easy, to Ryan's point, to just find a new tool and sign up for it because it's going to solve problem XYZ. And before you know it, you have so many tools, you've kind of bloated to this point where it's hard to even know if you're secure. There's too many moving parts, right?
Yeah, that's supply chain.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
That supply chain security piece is really important, right? Because deployed software on an asset, before you could just look at the operating system and see what files it was dropping. You could interrogate those running processes and get a sense for, is this a Java application? Does it have Log4j? Like, you could figure that out. But now with SaaS, the only way to know is to ask. And frankly, there's not a lot of good process to ask and get answers from some of your SaaS vendors. So that's where you see kind of this new emerging thing with SaaS security being software bill of materials, or SBOMs. Think of them like a recipe card for how to make your grandmother's apple pie. Like there's a certain set of things that go into that, and and the versions and how old they are and what the latest versions are, and like you get these recipe cards so that it becomes easier for you to understand when a new named vulnerability comes out, what the exposure is across all of your vendors, right? For that given thing. And I think, as we continue, we just had Spring for Shell that came out, not long after. And so that's in the MVC Spring framework. And so it'd be really great if there was a common way to ask and understand what these various different software components are that are being used in SaaS, so that we can more quickly assess our risk exposure as a company and potentially take corrective actions on our side to limit those exposures. Because right now we have to, ask, develop a set of questions related to that vulnerability, send it to the vendor, hope it gets to the right people to get us a correct response, get it back. Sometimes that can take up to 2 weeks. And we don't have 2 weeks when there's named vulnerabilities. We need to know right now if that software is in use. And so that to me is a huge emerging kind of facet. It still relates to application security and secure coding because it is software dependency, but it's a whole different set of things that I think we're seeing and thinking about more coming off of last year. And I know my team, I've forced the SBOM conversation internally for us and how we're going to accomplish it, because I do think it's ultimately where end consumers of technology are going to need to be mandating these recipe cards to understand their own risk exposure.
So, today, maybe in the absence of that kind of standardization, I mean, what sort of general advice can you provide folks in the audience about the kinds of things, and like even in the absence of a specific threat that has suddenly emerged, if you're just validating your cloud vendors and your tool vendors, your security tool vendors, what are the things that you should be asking about?
Yeah, I like the Cloud Security Alliance. Cloud Security Alliance is it's a group that has kind of gotten together and looked at what are effectively the types of security practices that you would expect from a cloud vendor, which SaaS is a cloud vendor, right? And so the Cloud Security Alliance actually has a really good framework for the types of considerations that you should expect your SaaS vendors to have good answers for. At a minimum, you need to be doing diligence when you onboard the vendor outside of just, does it meet my needs, right? You need to be assessing the robustness of the overall security program, what they're doing to keep that specific application secure that you're going to be using, how they're thinking about investing in security in the future. There's a whole set of questions around that. And then I think you also need to think through, probably more tactically, how are you going to use that specific SaaS vendor and what unique risks might exist for that vendor versus others? Obviously, like RMMs are a prime example, right? Our security has become, in my opinion, and arguably the most important feature of an RMM over the past 2 years. And so, when you're thinking about, the security of, a monitoring solution versus an endpoint management solution, right? Like something that monitors the health of your other SaaS applications, which you can buy, versus a tool that actually provides critical access to an environment. You have different sets of security considerations there that you need to think through and understand how the vendor, works to secure those and what basically, Brian and I have these conversations all the time. What's the product roadmap look like with regard to this threat? And like, how are you thinking about solving for this problem? And like, those are the conversations that I wish more MSPs were getting involved in, because that's how your products evolve, is by you engaging in those conversations. But I still remain completely underwhelmed by the amount of times that MSPs reach out to us to try and understand the impacts of these things. I think you have to do that. But if you need a good framework, like I said, Cloud Security Alliance is a good one. Brian, what luck have you had with vendors trying to understand their securities as it relates to SaaS? And, what do you look for?
Well, it's changed. I mean, I feel like the more I learn about security, I kind of look out for different things. I mean, generally, I'm looking at zero knowledge, zero trust. Like, can your employees see my data? And if so, why? Do they even need to see my data? Right? Do you have change controls in place to where if your product could bring me or one of my clients to their knees, do you have something to help protect? Like, what if there's an insider threat or something, right? Something to prevent the bomb going off from inside if they did get inside. And a lot of products don't necessarily come out of the gate with all of these features. But again, it gets back to the roadmap. Do you care about it? Are you listening to it? Because, I mentioned, that I feel like I'm working with more and more enterprise companies. It's not necessarily by choice. It's just because they have the features I need. It's not that I enjoy working with enterprise companies. I'd much rather work with a Datto, but at the same time, I feel like I'm getting at that crossroad where I have to kind of play in both areas and then hopefully assist these channel companies to understand the needs there and get that on the roadmap. The challenge I have is the average MSP doesn't really care about enterprise security. So when you have a channel vendor who's looking at their roadmap and wants to see adoption with the money they're investing into their product, naturally, they're going to want to work on products that they're hearing the MSP community say, we need this, we need that, we need this. Or versus me, I'm maybe in the top 5%, right? Wanting enterprise security features. Well, what's the adoption rate going to be? What's the return on investment, right? Other than getting rid of tech debt, and mitigating future risk, there's not really like an immediate benefit, right? Other than you made Brian happy, I guess, you know. So.
Well, I'm curious. I want to follow up on that a little bit. I mean, can you cite some examples, whatever, 1, 2, 3 examples of enterprise security features that are not commonly found in SMB-oriented products?
So I would say identity is probably the biggest thorn in my side. Why can't every SaaS vendor out there just integrate with Azure P1? Bring over my directory. I don't want to have to manage another set of users and groups and all that. I just want you to source it and have SSO, right? Employee onboarding and offboarding is our other thorn in the side right now. With all the work that takes, right?
The fact that vendors still charge for SSO, it's a massive problem. Like, to me, that's one of the biggest things that, like, you're requiring me to spend money to mitigate what I think is a table stakes level security issue. Yep. And like, it's not that difficult now to do SSO integrations. Like, there are entire libraries and frameworks for it. Absolutely bananas that vendors continue to charge people to do single sign-on integrations. So just, I don't know, really.
I almost feel like the government should fine companies for doing that.
I would be happy to see that.
You're basically charging people to disincentivize them from wanting to be more secure, right?
Yeah.
in an era when all we talk about is all these cybersecurity problems that we're having, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. It's always, I love when you go to a SaaS vendor and you look at like the matrix of what you get with the next licensing level. And literally there's this middle licensing level where the only thing you get is SSO. And I'm like, why are you charging me $4 more per user per month just for SSO? Like, that, we have to be getting past this now. It really is a huge problem. And I think that's going to be one of the reasons why identity and access management continues to be a major problem, is because it's not table stakes. It's not free. And it really should be. It should be part of the core service offering when you buy a SaaS solution.
So Ryan, I want to talk, techniques and policies and procedures as well, but let's start out with tools. Everybody in the audience here has their antivirus of choice, anti-spam, spam filtering, maybe EDR. How well suited are the tools, the sort of mainstream security tools in widespread use out there right now? How well suited are they to the SaaS security challenge?
I mean, they're well suited if your SaaS vendor is running them in their environment, right? So that's really where you get into like the questionnaire, like, hey, what anti-malware tools are you running in your environment? How do you protect your employees from social engineering threats? Like, those are the types of things you need to be asking them. But you can't run an antivirus on a website. Like, that's not a thing, right? And so I think there's a couple things that you do need. You need to be able to understand the actions that are being taken within that SaaS application. And that needs to be something that can generate audit activity that you can look at. Brian mentioned insider threat. You cannot detect insider threat without having some monitoring in place to discern what is normal and what is not normal. And that only happens if the application is providing robust enough logging. So logging is a huge piece of what you need from these SaaS applications. Again, I think, SaaS applications, a lot of people start, well, let me vet the authentication security. Do they support MFA? Throw all of that out. You should have an SSO provider. You should negotiate SSO as part of your deal with that vendor. And you should just be bringing your own SSO solution that has your secured configuration. Ideally, at this point, you're all using hardware tokens, FIDO2 with WebAuthn specifically for SaaS apps that are web-based. Because that provides, hacker-proof MFA. They can't man in the middle of it. They can't MFA push abuse their way through it. And so, I think those are a few things. you can't really, there's this kind of this ecosystem around CASB, which is like cloud access security brokers. It purports to be this kind of layer between your users and the SaaS applications.
Sorry, could you say that again?
It purports to be this layer between your users and these SaaS services that you're using to provide and extend additional security capabilities on top of those applications. And sometimes, frankly, there are security capabilities that you just wish existed within the SaaS application to begin with, but now you're needing to buy this another piece of technology, another tool, in order to sit in between. And whether it's, those either are kind of a proxy where your users are consuming the service through this CASB, or the CASB is pulling all that information out via APIs in order for you to make it actionable. And so I think when it comes to SaaS, you're starting to have to think about a different set of tools, because you need to get the information out of the SaaS application in order to analyze it to determine if the usage is safe or not. And you're needing to bring other technology solutions to those SaaS applications to provide the right level of security on top of it, because often the base level of security is insufficient. So that's a bit of a high level overview about how I think about tools and technology with regard to SaaS.
So you folks at Datto, you actually have a SaaS security product. Without turning this into a promotion for that product, maybe use SaaS Defense as an example of the kind of thing that a SaaS security specific tool can do, needs to do, that traditional security tools just maybe haven't had to take into account before.
Yeah, SaaS Defense is interesting because it was kind of was born out of when you look at Microsoft and you look at the effectiveness of their anti-spam, anti-phishing engines, a lot of stuff gets through there, right? And so, but that's a SaaS application. You've moved your email to a cloud service, and you consume it through the web now. And so your email, which used to be on-prem Exchange, I hope it used to. Keyword there is used to be. I really hope if you're still running on-prem Exchange, you're actively migrating that up. But that gets back to the default level of security in some of these SaaS apps is not enough. And so SaaS Defense came in and recognized that there was additional layers of filtering and security that needed to be placed on top of those mail services. And they extended that also out to collaboration platforms, which includes where we're already starting to see some emerging threats, which is your kind of your instant message chat systems, whether it's Teams or Slack or something else. So there's integrations there because, next thing you go back to the Twitter breach. There was a hacker that gotten access to Slack and was using that to kind of further their attack. And you need those solutions. And again, Slack is a SaaS application. And so, right, there's this now there's ecosystems of SaaS applications to protect SaaS applications. And that's what SaaS Defense is. And, so you have to look at, everything, you kind of need to almost remove yourself from how is it deployed to what is the right level of security. And then how do I go about getting that level of security for whatever that critical tool is that I need.
Ryan, how much is the responsibility on the SaaS application vendor to be thinking about and improving the measures to secure SaaS apps versus putting more onus on MSPs to find tools to protect SaaS applications from, to protect them from the SaaS applications, which should inherently be secure anyway, right? So how do you balance that?
I mean, in a utopia, the MSP would never have to worry because the vendor would just be doing all the things well. But the reality is economies of scale, limited time, limited resources, vendors are not going to be able to do all things well. And so that creates an ecosystem. Like Microsoft has a really robust ecosystem of vendor partners that are bolt-on services to help them improve the security of their solutions. And Amazon has the same thing. And, you see these kind of ecosystems cropping up. So I think, unfortunately, that's a thing that's here to stay. I think where MSPs need to get more vocal is where it's very clear that one of, Brian got into this, like, he has to go up market to enterprise solutions to get some of the features and services he wants. MSPs need to be getting more vocal about what those missing inherent features and functionality are that they need in order to continue to use SMB-based technology safely and in a SaaS-based model. Brian mentioned zero trust. I think that's a huge talk track right now, especially coming off of last summer. I don't think zero trust is a panacea. I think it is something we should be working towards, but if you're working towards zero trust at the absence of removing RDP open from the internet, you're probably not focusing on the right thing. And so, we still have a ways to go in terms of maturing the enterprise security programs that we see in MSPs. But yeah, it's a shared responsibility for sure between MSPs and their vendors. And sometimes, like, there's going to be a time when your vendor just doesn't do something well, and you need to augment that. And, like, again, that's the SaaS Defense and M365. That's a perfect example where Microsoft is providing a solution that's 90%, but 90% is not good enough. And for them to focus on industry specific threats is much more difficult for them given their size and their scale. And so you get these niche players that can come out and say, hey, I have really high quality additional email security for the SMB market. That's actually a good thing, I think, because ultimately you have a really robust, highly available service that backends it with the really quality industry specific security technology that sits that can sit in between it and extend the functionality. So I don't think we're going to see that change, but again, I do think there's an opportunity for MSPs to be more vocal about the features that they feel are missing and should be foundational. Just like the rant I just went on about SSO, like that should be a foundational functionality of every single SaaS solution in the SMB space. And Brian's right. Insert your SSO provider here. There should be one SSO provider that MSPs are using to secure identity and access management for their end customers. And then whether it's SaaS or some other model largely doesn't matter because it's all being protected by a single identity layer.
What I'd like to see more of, and it's hard, is less duplicate efforts, right? I mean, when we think about, hey, I've got 20 different vendors, I need better identity security, rather than me expect all those 20 vendors to invest money into creating better identity security, why not just implement what's an SSO solution that already has that, right? So there's this idea that there's going to be certain layers that just make sense that you're never going to expect or even want that vendor to do because they won't be able to do it as well, right? So I really wish there'd be kind of an understanding of like, hey, all the channel vendors, what are the security things we should be doing? Like we need more auditing, more logging. We need API integrations so that I can send that info to a SIM to have my SOC take a look at it, right? Right there gives me a ton of added security for, along with SSO I would want, right? And they're not really adding anything other than more logging and the ability to access that logging, right?
Yeah. The only place I'll maybe differ slightly is I think, at least, my view of the world is smaller than Brian's, but a lot of the solutions have good logging. What they lack is the ability for MSPs to get that out and to make sense of it and to analyze it in a quick and easy way. Brian said he has 9 agents. Does he need to be logging into 9 portals to review the audit logs natively in that portal? Or can he extract that to some central location? I think that's where we need to improve is the ability to get that information out into some other solution that you can use to monitor for insider threats, which frankly today are also external threats, right? You look at the Lockbit threat group and then Lapsus, which may or may not still be a thing after the recent arrests. Both of those groups have had a lot of success recruiting insiders. And so the ability to get the information out and be like, hey, it's weird that my internal tech's account is deploying new scripts to deploy to all my endpoints at 4 a.m. on a Saturday, right? Like Is that an insider threat? Is that an external threat actor that's compromised your employees' credentials? I don't know, but it would be way easier if you could get that information out and monitor it in a central place and build more rules around it to alert you more quickly. Because right now, that a lot of that information is siloed and stuck, and it puts a lot of onus on MSPs, which I don't think is helping them scale in solving their security problems.
So we've spoken quite a bit about tools and technologies from more of a policies and procedures kind of standpoint. Can you provide any recommendations, guidelines? Shadow IT came up. Maybe keeping a close eye on everything that's in the customer's cloud estate as an example. But what are maybe some best practices outside of deploying tools and technologies that folks in the audience here can use to be more SaaS secure?
I can share something we're doing as an MSP. So traditionally we had like a desktop application policy, right? These apps are allowed to run, these apps are not allowed to run. We're literally developing that out for clients now. We have tools we're running that are gathering info about all the cloud apps all their employees are using. And we're sitting down with this big list going, all right, here's everything that's used. What do you absolutely need? That's what we start with. What do you know you need to run your business, right? And then that starts with the kind of initial approval. And then we're left over with like, why are all these other apps being used, right? And then the goal is to eventually block and not allow anything outside of that. Unfortunately, it's not a switch we can turn off without upsetting a lot of end users. So it's kind of a progressive, hey, before we block access to this app, we need to make sure this end user understands why and make sure they can perform that same function some other way, right? But it's really kind of that idea. It's like you have to, it starts with step one, pillar one of NIST, identify. You got to identify what's out there and kind of work backwards from it is what we've been doing that so far is working.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, that gets really to, Brian mentioned NIST. I was going to go CIS controls, implementation group 1.
Yeah.
One of the processes that is, I had to actually implement improvements to our back-end processes in order to compensate for the lack of MSP processes around SaaS hygiene. And I'll give you a perfect example. And we would look at MSP administrative user accounts that have been provisioned for their tech stacks. And we ran an audit report to look at how frequently are these accounts actually logging in. The amount of completely dormant accounts that have been like not used, not logged in at all, but were still completely enabled and valid for over a year was astounding to me, which tells me there wasn't a rigor around role-based access, use it and lose it. Is this person even still employed with the business? Is it appropriately revoked? And so we went and I said, listen, just seeing all the attacks that were happening with MSPs, largely due to credential theft and misuse. And I was like, we need to automatically disable any account that exists that hasn't been logged into for 90 days. And force a password reset, disable the account. They got to have their security admin go back in and re-enable it. Like that is just a completely unacceptable operating risk, both to me as the vendor, because ultimately if your credentials breach and it goes on Reddit, my name goes on Reddit with you. So that's my risk too. There's a shared responsibility there, and MSPs weren't holding up their part. So we implemented process and procedure to do it for them. And so I think that those basic framework hygiene things, Brian just was right. It starts with identifying, know what you have, understand how you're protecting it, implement certain fundamental processes around the security of those things you have. That extends to your SaaS real estate. And those processes really, arguably it's more important for you. This is going to be weird for me to say as a tool vendor, but I've always been people, then process, then technology, right? Your technology should support the processes you want to undertake to keep your solution secure, which are ultimately driven by people. Your people and processes should not be dictated by your tools, right? And so from that perspective, the process is actually more important than the tool. and you need to apply those processes. And as you're in there learning what you have, implementing those processes, you're going to start to see where you can't maybe implement some of those processes. And maybe that's where you need a solution like a CASB or an SSO solution or something else. Let those gap assessments of your ability to implement those processes drive your technology choices and how to extend those different applications.
Very interesting. So I think we have time for one more question on this topic, and I want to kind of phrase it to both of you, because we have an MSP and we've got a vendor here, and both, I think, when we look back at this conversation, it seems that SaaS security is very much a shared responsibility in this case. There's a lot of onus on the vendor. There's also onus on the MSP. So Ryan, I'll let you go first. Name one thing MSPs could do better that would help you as a software vendor, as a SaaS vendor, be more secure, or to improve security.
Yeah, I think
you mentioned old accounts. What's maybe one more thing along that?
Yeah, I mean, I think along those lines, like, I'll give you another example, and I think this is honestly what it is. Vendors will release, and we're not, just to be clear before I say this, we're culpable in this too, okay? But vendors will I'll release a new security functionality in a product, and I'll write up the knowledge bases, I'll do the product announcement, yada, yada, I'll email you about it. I'll do everything I can to tell you about it. And then I'll even tell you it's a best practice that you now go and enable this thing. And then 5 to 10% of MSPs will do it. The need for MSPs to continue to stay current with what the latest configuration security best practices are for their tools is important. And Brian knows I've been on this, him and I have been talking about this for years, and I still think there's more that we need to do as vendors to make that easier for MSPs. But the fact that we haven't made it as easy as it could be does not absolve the responsibility of MSPs to continue to stay current and try to understand and implement those best practices. Now, ultimately, what I did is kind of what I did with the SSO solutions and people not disabling accounts. Now I just say, I'm releasing this thing and I'm making it the default. And if you don't want it, if it's going to impact your business in an adverse way, you have a short window of time to tell me about it, and then I will opt you out of that. But otherwise, we're just going to start to roll these secure defaults out to you. And it took a while for us to get the business to change its thinking, but I had to do that because I can't, the biggest megaphone in the world, I still can't get MSPs to implement the right set of configuration best practices. So I think there needs to be some rigor around, I don't know, quarterly, twice a year, I don't know, going back and looking at, have I implemented all is my solution configured securely to the best vendor best practices? Is there anything unexpected about the configuration? Because, MSP technicians are in there troubleshooting something. They might turn a feature off in order to troubleshoot something and then never turn it back on. Brian was talking about change management. Like, that gets back to change management. And so there's some rigor around that I really think we need more help from MSPs, because it really is a shared responsibility. I have to provide you a solution that you can deploy into 40 different environments and have it work, which means I need to give you a lot of flexibility. But at the end of the day, we're relying on you to configure that thing securely in order to protect you and your customer, as well as us as the vendor, because our name is on that too. And so, we're relying on the MSP to do the right thing from a config management standpoint.
That's a good one. And I have to imagine a lot of the challenge of getting MSPs to do that is just because of the sheer number of SaaS applications that are in use, which I think is probably something that should also be addressed over time.
Yeah, and I think, we shoot ourselves in the foot. We send too many marketing emails, and then we get the one from the security guy that's like, hey, you really need to enable this functionality. You're just like, send it to Trashcanistan, like, done, not, we're nothing to see here. We're not doing it. So,
I bet that's a lot of the challenge as well, is just the number of messages received, for sure.
Right. So how do you, we had, I laugh. We had MFA implemented natively in Datto when I joined back in 2017. I was still getting email questions from partners in 2019. When is Datto going to support MFA? Right. Wow. That is the core of the problem. Like, I built it. It's there. You just need to go look for it. I think there's a lot, but again, it's a two-sided equation. We need to figure out a way to make it easier, and we need MSPs to engage in it. And I think as an industry, we haven't figured that out yet. And that's leading to excess risk that is sadly completely avoidable.
For sure. So Brian, I want to turn it over to you with kind of the same question. What should the other than SSO implementation across the board, like we know that one, what else should these SaaS application vendors be doing to help you be more secure in ways that maybe they're not doing right now?
So in listening to Ryan, it's funny because I literally was thinking, I was like, that sounds like the tech debt of an MSP. He wants MSPs to get rid of their tech debt. And then I'm thinking, well, that's kind of what I'm wanting vendors to do, right? So maybe that's the understanding, right? I mean, I've started using kind of new words and some of my latest talks of really like getting MSPs to understand what's your attack surface, who's in your supply chain, and what type of tech debt are you dealing with, either internally on your company, things you're behind on, or with your clients, or with vendors that you're using. And ultimately, you know, being a CEO, I look out like 5 years now. I'm always looking out 5 years, right? People hear me say things and they think, oh, Brian always changes his mind. He does this, does that. No, I'm trying to like figure out what is it going to look like 5 years from now based on how things are going now. And that's my concern. Tech debt is probably one of the most expensive things to get rid of because you don't really make money getting rid of it. You just lower risk. So if you don't have to spend money getting rid of tech debt, the other way is to just cut the tech debt out of the supply chain, right? And basically shrink your attack surface. So that's kind of what I'm looking at. High level variables, right? All these vendors we work with, what's our environment look like? Our clients, we're firing clients. We fired 5 clients last quarter because they didn't see the value in security and they didn't want to spend the money on it. And that was a risk. It was a shared risk I wasn't willing to carry because I can go find another client who has a lower risk tolerance, right? So I don't know if that even answers your question. Specifically, it's really SSO attacks. I would say that's number one. Number two, I would say better MFA support. But I mean, if you're doing SSO, then you're kind of doing SSO through your MFA. I mean, that gets back to the duplicate efforts thing, right? I'd rather see a company rather than try to spend money developing their own MFA and everything, just integrate with an existing and call it a day and not charge tax for it, right?
Very good indeed. Well, that was a fascinating discussion, and we got a few minutes left with Ryan. So, Rich, I think it'd be fun if we could learn a little bit more about Ryan by playing a little bit of 5 questions. Ryan, do you know this particular game that we play on ChannelPro?
I do, and I'm absolutely terrified now. But let's do it.
So let me set it up for you. So we have a game that we play. It's a lot of fun. We call it 5 questions. And basically the way it works is usually me and Rich, we do this with the host, but I want to do this with you. We will ask you 5 questions off the top of our head. And that's the key. It cannot be something that we write in advance. We have to think about it off the top of our heads. And I guarantee you it will not be work related. It will be just to learn about you. No gotchas, nothing to embarrass you, but just to have a little fun and learn a little bit more about you. Yep.
Yeah.
All right. So Rich, we've got a guest here. So why don't I will take one question and I will let you and Brian ask the other 2 each. So Rich, why don't you go ahead and kick us off?
Okay, so we know now that you are not a seafood guy. So what is the go-to cuisine, your favorite when you're going out to eat?
Favorite when I'm going out to eat. I actually tend to try and find something that's more exotic on the menu. So it's actually not that I'm not a seafood guy. I'm actually allergic to it. So I have a lot of allergies that I actually dictate what I can and cannot eat. So my goal whenever I go someplace is I generally try to go someplace new and find something that I've never had before that I can still eat because of my food allergies. And so it's a fun little different game that I get to play when I go out to eat.
Sounds good. Brian, question number 2 to you.
You know, I do want to get to know you a little more, and all we ever really talk about is work. And I know earlier you said all I do outside of work is run to the beach, like, right? So let's switch it up. What if let's say you won the lotto, so you didn't have to work anymore, right? Security isn't your life anymore. What would you do with your time, right?
Yep. I already have the answer for this one. I aspire to someday be someone that owns a taco truck by the beach with good surfing so that I can close the taco truck whenever the swell's up, go surf, and then when the swell's down, I'll go reopen the taco truck. That's my ultimate goal, is to be a taco truck surf bum.
That is an incredibly attainable goal, actually.
It actually is. Yeah. I try to set things. I actually modeled it when I went to Hawaii on my honeymoon. There was a guy there that had, I guess he drives this truck up to Honolulu Bay, and he serves what is known locally as the best fish tacos. And I just got talking to him, and he's like, yeah, I surf when I want. I open the truck up, I serve fish tacos. It's like, and he was like the happiest guy in the world. And I'm like, I don't see why I wouldn't want to do this. Like, this seems awesome. So yeah, that would be what I would do. I would become a surfing ex-CISO taco truck purveyor.
That's awesome. I'll save my question for last, since I only get one. So Rich, question number 3 to you.
And just for the record, I now have a new aspiration in life. I had never really considered this before, but listening to that, you know what? Especially if it's in Hawaii, but that aside. So off the air, before we started talking, you mentioned that we might hear from your dog. We did not, or at least we haven't so far. Maybe I'm about to mess that up. But tell us about the dog. What kind of dog, dog's name, etc.
Yeah. So Brian and I, actually, I'm going to pull Brian into this question. We're mutual Frenchie lovers. So we both have French bulldogs. Mine's a 4-year-old blue fawn. I think you might have just heard him in the background there. His name is Dudley. And the blue fawn, he's actually red, but the coat is like iridescent. So in the sun, it actually looks like his coat is glowing. So it's actually really cool. And he's an awesome dog that's very independent and has a mind of his own. And his mom is probably going crazy right now trying to keep him quiet, because when I tell her when I have podcasts, and her goal is to keep him quiet while I'm on them. So, and she had had a job of, we had a contractor here doing some work. So she's probably not my biggest fan right now.
I think the dog heard us talking about him. So that's why he was speaking up. Those dogs, they hear everything. Brian, question number 4 to you.
All right. This one is kind of the long-term question anyone in IT typically gets. Are you Mac or Windows, and why?
It's such a weird question. It depends on what I'm doing. Like,
that's a good answer.
I would tell you, like, it depends on what I'm doing. I have a Windows machine, I have a Mac machine, and I have a Kali Linux VM. So like I use Mac for my day-to-day, just because my experience, it's been a little bit more reliable as an end user. And like, when my days are jam-packed with 40, 15-minute back-to-back meetings, I really need high reliability. Like, I can't be dealing with like, oh, I need to reboot again, which takes 10 minutes. Like, so I tend to do Mac for day to day, but if I'm doing some, if I'm poking around doing some hacker stuff, I'll hop on the Kali VM. If I'm, if I'm testing some Datto products, or if I'm modeling some stuff on, I'll use the Windows machine. Cause again, you can't not use Windows, because that's what the majority of SMBs use. And so I don't have the luxury of having a single preference. I have to be a user of all of them. And frankly, I think in security, in order to stay current, you have to be a user of all three anyway. I don't recommend, anything outside of those three. Like, I wouldn't go Solaris. I wouldn't go, VMS or, some other exotic operating system. But I think, Linux workstations are coming along quite well. So we'll see. Well, maybe ask me again in 10 years. I might be a Linux desktop fan.
But you bring up a good point though, right? Because with everything moving to be cloud apps, really now the browser is kind of what you're more concerned with.
It doesn't matter. It could be a Chromebook, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I could argue that there's probably 20% of people in my company that could do their job with a Chromebook.
Fascinating. Yeah, it is going more and more that way. That's absolutely true.
I think it's just going to get, especially like pandemic, working from home, migration to cloud, like that number is just going to grow over the coming years.
Yeah, we can go back in time and I'll use OS2 Warp with a decent browser. It'll still work. All right. So question number 5 to me. I'm not really sure which way I want to go, but you talked about wanting to. You talk about when you like to go to the beach, but I want to ask this different question. So rather than running to the beach, let's say you want to unwind. What is your preferred method of unwinding? Is it a movie? Is it a TV show? Is it music? Is it video gaming? What is it?
Oh man, I'll answer all of them. I like. I'm probably 2 or 3 years ago, I got into electronic dance music. So I do some EDM, but I'm also an old school like punk, emo, rock fans. And yeah, I grew up listening to country too. So my music tastes are kind of all over the place. I really enjoy fishing. Like if I really need to take a break, you'll find me somewhere fishing. But my joke is I'd almost always rather be fishing, which is true. But yeah, I mean, at night, I don't do well without a good show. And I think my wife and I just did Yellowstone in 1883, which we're huge fans of. Love that show. It's so well done. And now I'm jonesing for the next seasons of that. So yeah, a little bit of everything. And yeah, I mean, being coastal, there's a lot of interesting things. You can kayak, you can stand up paddleboard, you can go power boating, you can go fishing. So generally almost anything related to like Long Island Sound or the sea is generally, you'll find me if I'm needing a little bit more than a quick disconnect from the world.
And it's definitely interesting. It's your biggest unwind passion is fishing, even though you're allergic to seafood. So just don't eat it.
Yes. I like being a conundrum, right? I want to be a guy that sells fish tacos and likes to fish and surf, but doesn't eat it.
And I'm going to ask question 5B because I feel slighted that I didn't get 2 questions. And I know then we got to wrap up. What is the ultimate way to outfit a taco?
I think it depends on the meat and like what taco you're building. But I actually there's a taco at a place here in town that they make a duck taco, which is really good. I actually really like that one. So again, I generally try to find something a little more exotic on the menu that's interesting. So yeah, I would say probably a duck taco, usually with some sort of interesting sauce and maybe some uncommon garnish, like mint or something like that, like something really different, like something that when you eat it, you don't expect. That's, I guess, what you should expect from my future surf and taco truck.
Well, it sounds delicious, and now I want tacos for a very late lunch. So I'm going to go and do that. Ryan, thank you so much for joining us. It was a fascinating conversation. I'm sure everybody got a lot out of it. Please take one moment if anybody wants to learn more about, especially like the Datto Sas Defense that you talked about, or any Datto products. How can they get a hold of you? How can they find out more?
Yeah, I mean, obviously talk to your Datto account team. We're here to answer any questions you have. Trial the technology. I mean, the SaaS Defense one's super easy. Just to plug in with Microsoft, you can turn it on and immediately start seeing what Microsoft defenses are missing. So definitely reach out to your account team. Me specifically, if you need me, I'm CISO at datto.com. I don't claim to respond super quickly to those, but I do generally try to get through that inbox at least once a week. So if you need anything from me directly, you can find me there. And otherwise, I hope everyone continues to be well, stay safe. And my last call to action will be, if you are not doing CIS Implementation Group 1 as an MSP, you are getting left behind. You must start and begin your journey to pay down your MSP tech debt and work on Implementation Group 1 of the CIS framework. You will be doing both yourself and me a favor.
Great advice. Awesome stuff. The Chief Information Security Officer of Datto, Ryan Weeks, thank you so much for joining us. We are going to take a short break. When we come back, Brian Weiss will be with us on the other side to break down the show, maybe have a little bit more fun. We'll just have to see what's in store. So stick around. We'll be right back. And we are back with part 3 of this special edition of ChannelPro Weekly, sponsored by our friends at Datto. Rich, it was an amazing interview, actually. Just all around, the topic of SaaS security has got to be forefront for everybody that's working with these apps and working with clients, because with all of it going up to the cloud and going into these SaaS apps, keeping them secure is more important than ever. And one thing that I'll add as a takeaway from that is it really illustrated how much SaaS security is about both the vendor and the MSP. They are in it together, and they can't be mutually exclusive. And I think that was one takeaway that I had. Did you have any good takeaways from that, Rich?
Well, I thought the whole shared responsibility conversation was really, really interesting, and I do hope that MSPs who are maybe inclined to point the finger of blame at their vendors not that they shouldn't when things go wrong, but I do hope more people do come to understand and embrace their role in the SaaS security story. The other thing, I mean, there were a lot of things I could point to that were really interesting about that conversation, but there was something Ryan said almost as an aside, like in passing, that I thought it was really good to hear, actually, which was when he said that to a great extent, security is the most important feature of an RMM system these days. And it's encouraging to hear that point of view from a major vendor, that security isn't the thing that you also need to do on top of the other things that RMM software is used for. That has been, thanks to supply chain attacks and all these other security threats, that's job number one. Anything else after that is behind making sure that this platform is secure. And I hope that a lot of vendors are thinking that way now.
Absolutely. Brian, any takeaways or anything you wanted to highlight from that interview?
Yeah, I mean, the shared responsibility is an important one, and to understand that, everyone's got tech debt, right? The vendor as well as you. And it's important to be aware of your own tech debt before you start pointing at other people's tech debts.
Never make fun of somebody else's tech debt before you make
when you've got your own that you haven't cleaned up, right? But I like kind of where, and I'm gonna try to use this more moving forward, but the shared responsibility, I think even across vendors, right? With the idea that, hey, let's not duplicate efforts, right? If we can all just integrate with Azure P1 and we can call it a day on the identity layer and check that box, right? So I'd really like to almost see vendors kind of getting together, creating their own best practice on, hey, when our partners need XYZ level of security, how should we handle this, right? So that we're not having to duplicate efforts, and because it's shared even to the point where I've got SaaS vendors, checking other SaaS vendors to make sure they're secure, right? It's almost like it's like a trifecta. I got me, the MSP, I got the vendor I'm using, and then I got a third vendor making sure that vendor is being secure for me. It
becomes a tangled mess very, very quickly.
Yep.
So good stuff. Great interview. Big thanks to Ryan Weeks for joining us for that. And I hope everyone got a lot out of that. So we did kind of play a 5 questions game with Ryan while we were doing that. So I don't necessarily want to do that with you, Brian. Plus, I think we played 5 questions last time you were on. But you are a big Datto partner. You're part of the advisory board there. I think it would be kind of cool to get your insight on some Datto products. So I want to ask you to maybe talk about your 3 favorite Datto products or most interesting Datto products right now, and why you find them interesting and great.
Yeah, so I'll start out with my favorite, mainly because it helps me and my team sleep at night, which is the Datto Cirrus backups. We moved all our clients to those starting in 2018. It took a little while, but the amount of time we spend maintaining and managing backups now, and the lower amount of stress that we have now if we ever need to do a restore, because you're always wondering like, all right, I got to do this restore. Let's hope this works. Hands down. I mean, that product is a turnkey product out of the box, ready to go. There's other vendors out there that do a similar thing, but they're not as turnkey. I mean, there's too many bolt-on things you got to worry about. When it comes to backup, I just want it to work and not have to have a huge total cost of ownership maintaining it. Right. So that's my favorite. I'd say one of the more interesting products recently is their Datto Sas Defense. Right. And that's kind of tailoring off our conversation we just had around SaaS security. I was looking for a new email security solution, and I really wanted something that was kind of back end tied into the API of Office 365, because we do use that as our main frontline security. And their product is pretty cool. The way that it filters email, it actually kind of does like an EDR view, if you will. So it sandboxes the email, picks apart all the attachments, logos, and literally goes through and verifies, like, is this even a legit logo, Microsoft logo that's being used, right? Where does this, okay, this goes to a PDF. Well, now let's scan that PDF. Does that PDF have any links in it? Oh, where does that link go? And it gives you kind of this visual spider of like what the email is trying to do, right? And immediately identifies very quickly whether or not there's a concern and scores it in several different areas. So when I saw that, I was like, I've never seen an email security product do that at all. There's always just some score it gives it for why it blocked it. It's never given me a visual representation, mapping out, showing why, what parts of the email were malicious, which ones, weren't. And so that was awesome. And then I come to find out, oh, well, it scans Teams and SharePoint and OneDrive. And I'm thinking about the fact that I'm trying to get my MSP to move away from email to where maybe we're checking it 2 or 3 times a day. And we're living primarily in Teams now, right? So anytime we're looking at updating processes or workflows, if it's anything we were relying on an email for, we're immediately saying, hey, how do we get this into Teams, right? We don't have to worry about this in email anymore. Well, now if you're not working in email much, and that's going to be less of a surface attack space for threat vectors to take advantage of, because it's not getting used as much. So naturally, they're going to go to the collaboration tools next, right? And they're going to try to get invited to a meeting or get in on a Slack channel or get into some collaboration tool where they can then basically almost make it look like they're part of the team, right? I mean, any employee is going to assume, hey, they're on our collaboration tool, they must be legit, right? And then start sending links, who knows, whatever, what they might try to do. So I see that as kind of a next frontier. And I was already wondering like kind of how we would handle that. And that's essentially what this product does, right? So if you think of any app that you use to communicate on, it's a potential threat vector. And the ones that people use the most are going to be the largest vectors, right? And then how do you secure those? The other thing I like about SaaS Defense too is just the nature of what it does, right? It looks for behavior that shouldn't be happening. It looks for, threats. And so how do you then extend that kind of into the CASB landscape, which is what I've been talking with Datto about? Like, can I get SaaS Defense to look at your other products for me? What about Datto Workplace, right? And then that brings me to my third item, which I think is, I would say like it's favorite and most interesting because I feel like it's a sleeping giant, is Datto Workplace. I mean, the data governance that you get out of the box with that and the ease of use for the end user, all the way down to them being able to handle data governance items on their own, is amazing. Like I would rather have Datto Workplace over OneDrive and SharePoint in any environment. And so would my team. It's just easier to manage. So I've been trying to get them to integrate that even tighter, into Teams and things so that someone could be in Teams and be looking at Datto Workplace files, but it feels like they're looking at SharePoint files instead. It's like got that same feel to it, right? So File sync and share product is what Datto Workplace is. And to get the equivalent data governance that I've looked at on the Microsoft licensing, you're basically at an E5 license, or an E3 license plus E5 compliance, versus the small price tag of Datto Workplace, which is, much smaller than trying to upgrade to that license.
Yeah, those are big licenses for sure. That adds up real quick. Well, very cool. I think that's some neat products for people to think about and things that they may not have thought about before. Rich, any other questions for Mr. Weiss before we wrap up this special edition?
No, just a big thank you to Brian for joining us on what was relatively short notice, and just a great fit for the conversation we've been having.
Yeah, truly excellent stuff. Brian, for those who wanted to get to know you a little bit more, learn more about you, learn more about your business, where can they go? How can they find you?
itech-solutions.com. I know it's a long domain, itech-solutions.com. Also, I'm on Facebook, LinkedIn, Brian J. Weiss. I use my middle initial because there's another Brian Weiss out there. And it's not just the doctor. There's another IT guy. But yeah, I told you guys I was on a couple of weeks ago and I said, hey, have me back anytime. And so here I am.
And here you are again. And it was great. And thank you so much for coming on. And we will have you back again. That is a guarantee. No, in case you missed it this time, because we're doing this kind of well in advance. So we don't know what we've missed yet, but you will have to tune in next week to find out what you might have missed as well. Big thanks to Ryan Weeks from Datto for joining us. Big thanks to Datto for sponsoring this special edition. It's nice that we're able to provide an episode for you during an event week, which is usually not normal. So that is really exciting. Rich, if people want to learn more about the events, where can they go?
They should go to events.channelpronetwork.com. So, by the time you're hearing this, a little too late to join us in Chicago, but we've got 4 more events coming up, beginning of June in Dallas, later in the year in Charlotte, North Carolina, Washington, D.C., and Los Angeles, Southern California. So events.channelpronetwork.com.
Yep. And stay tuned to future episodes of the show. We'll give you some more information on how you can join us for those as well, with some special promo codes. So come back and check us out in a future episode. And with that, of course, set channelpronetwork.com as your homepage. Go there each and every day. You'll find the latest news, white papers, articles, downloads, all kinds of stuff to not only keep you informed of what's going on in the channel, but also up to date on best practices to help you make more money, which is always what we are looking for as well. Subscribe to ChannelPro Weekly everywhere podcasts are found. Subscribe to us on YouTube. So if you're on YouTube, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the bell. Look, every button that's on YouTube, just press it, and good things will happen. That is a promise. Leave a nice comment too. That always goes a long way. And of course, with that, big thanks to Datto for sponsoring this special edition. And we will see everybody in a future episode. I don't know what episode number we're going to be on, but it'll be higher than 221. I know that for sure. So we will see everybody then. Take care.